A millionaire stopped to help an elderly woman on a stormy night. What she said changed his life forever. The bitter November wind whipped through Manhattan's concrete canyons as Lucas Warren's Bentley sliced through the early morning fog. His eyes darted between his Patek Philippe watch and the urgent emails flooding his phone screen. 30 minutes until the billion-dollar merger meeting. 30 minutes to secure his legacy. The tires splashed through a puddle, sending dirty water cascading over an elderly street sweeper. In his rearview mirror, Lucas caught a glimpse of the old man's trembling figure in the soaked uniform. Something in those dignified eyes made him slam the brakes. While you're getting comfortable with this touching story, take a moment to share where you're watching from and hit subscribe. Your presence makes our community more special. Lucas Warren wasn't born into wealth. He clawed his way up from the crumbling streets of South Bronx. At 45, his corner office on the 87th floor of Manhattan's most prestigious building told only half the story. The other half lay buried in 25 years of missed dinners, broken relationships, and a relentless pursuit of success that had left him wealthy beyond measure, yet inexplicably hollow. His morning routine never varied: wake at 4:30 a.m., premium coffee imported from Colombia, overnight market reports, and a workout in his private gym overlooking Central Park. The $25 million penthouse echoed with emptiness, its pristine rooms untouched by family laughter or holiday gatherings. His marriage to Catherine, once the talk of New York's social circle, had crumbled 3 years ago, leaving him with nothing but a hefty divorce settlement and a collection of regrets. The business world knew him as the Shark of Wall Street, a nickname earned through hostile takeovers and ruthless negotiations. 12 companies acquired in the past 5 years, each adding another zero to his net worth, each taking another piece of his humanity. His employees feared his Monday morning meetings, where careers could end with a single dissatisfied glance. Yet there were moments, usually late at night, when Lucas would stand at his floor-to-ceiling windows, staring at the city lights below, questioning the cost of his empire. The photos on his desk told the story: young Lucas at his college graduation, eyes bright with hope and ambition; Lucas closing his first major deal; Lucas at the opening of his foundation, a tax write-off that his PR team insisted upon. The progression showed not just success, but a gradual hardening, a loss of something essential. His closest relationship was with his executive assistant, Margaret, who had stuck with him for 15 years, managing his empire with quiet efficiency while watching him retreat further into his fortress of wealth. She alone knew about the sleeping pills carefully hidden in his desk drawer, the quiet donations to his old neighborhood that he insisted remain anonymous, the way he sometimes stared at old family photos when he thought no one was watching. The upcoming merger would be his crowning achievement. Acquiring Pierce Industries, his longtime rival, would create the largest technology conglomerate on the East Coast. The deal would affect thousands of jobs, reshape market dynamics, and cement his legacy. The board meeting scheduled for this morning would determine the final details. Everything had to be perfect. The morning news played silently on multiple screens in his office: stock prices, world events, weather forecasts. His personal chef had prepared his usual breakfast: organic eggs, artisanal bread, fresh fruit, but it sat untouched on his desk. The hunger that drove him seemed to feed on something else these days. Recent rumors of corporate espionage and potential insider trading had begun circulating in financial circles. The SEC was asking questions, journalists were digging, and his legal team was working overtime. Lucas knew the merger had to happen now before any potential scandals could derail it. The pressure was mounting, and he could feel it in his tightening chest, in the migraines that came more frequently, in the growing sense that everything could crumble at any moment. His therapist mandatory sessions required by the board after his divorce had warned him about the unsustainable nature of his lifestyle. Success at what cost? Lucas, she would ask, while he checked emails on his phone. He had stopped going to the sessions months ago, too busy for self-reflection, too focused on the next deal, the next victory, the next distraction from the growing void. The rare moments of human connection came in strange places: a thank you note from a janitor's son who received an anonymous scholarship, a genuine smile from the barista who knew his coffee order, a nod of understanding from another late-night worker in a neighboring skyscraper. But these moments were quickly buried under meetings, contracts, and the endless pursuit of more. This morning was supposed to be like any other. Wake up, conquer, sleep, repeat. The merger would be his masterpiece, his legacy, his vindication. The morning traffic, the street sweeper, the split-second decision to stop, none of this was part of the plan. But sometimes life's most significant moments come disguised as inconveniences, and the biggest changes begin with the smallest choices. At 72, John Anderson's weathered hands told the story of a life devoted to others. Once the respected headmaster of Riverside Academy, one of New York's most prestigious private schools, he now pushed a broom along Madison Avenue at dawn, his faded blue uniform a stark contrast to the designer suits rushing past. But beneath his humble appearance lay a legacy that had shaped hundreds of young lives over 4 decades in education. The tragedy that redefined his life struck 3 years ago. His only son, Michael, a promising young architect, and daughter-in-law Sarah were driving home from a charity event when a drunk driver crossed the median. The crash left 8-year-old Tommy orphaned, and John with a choice: no grandfather should face retire to raise his grandson or watch Tommy enter the foster system. The decision took less than a heartbeat. His pension wasn't enough. Private school bills, medical expenses for Tommy's asthma, and the basic necessities of raising a growing boy forced John to sell their family home in Connecticut. They moved to a 1-bedroom apartment in Queens, where John slept on a pull-out couch so Tommy could have the bedroom. The walls were thin, but they were thick with Tommy's artwork and academic achievements, straight A's despite everything the boy had lost. Every morning John rose at 3 a.m., quietly preparing Tommy's lunch, always with a handwritten note of encouragement before heading to his street sweeping job. The same streets where he once walked as a distinguished educator now became his workplace, but John carried himself with the same dignity that had commanded respect in Riverside's hallways. Between shifts, he tutored Tommy and 3 other children from their building, refusing payment from their struggling single mothers. His colleagues at Riverside had been shocked when he resigned. The board offered to help to create a special fund, but John declined. A man must stand on his own feet, he'd said, though his voice cracked as he packed up 30 years of memories from his office. The photos of graduating classes, the handmade gifts from students, the worn leather chair where he'd counseled countless troubled teens, all now stored in a small storage unit he could barely afford. In his pocket, John carried 2 treasures: a photo of Tommy's parents on their wedding day and a crumpled newspaper clipping from 1994 about Riverside's scholarship program for underprivileged students. The program, his life's work, had helped over 200 students attend college. One of them now worked in the same hospital where Tommy received his asthma treatments, though the doctor didn't recognize his former headmaster in the street sweeper's uniform. The hardest moments came when former students passed him on the street. Some nodded politely, not recognizing him. Others did a double take, confusion and pity mixing in their expressions. John learned to keep his head down during rush hour when the likelihood of such encounters was highest. Yet he never felt shame in his work, only gratitude for the ability to provide for Tommy. Recent nights had become harder. The cough he'd been hiding from Tommy wouldn't go away, and the pain in his chest grew sharper. The free clinic doctor had handed him a referral for tests he couldn't afford. John tucked the paper away with the unpaid bills, forcing a smile when Tommy showed him another perfect math test. His small apartment held evidence of his former life: shelves of classic literature, a worn Oxford English dictionary, framed degrees from Columbia University. In the evenings he still dressed for dinner, teaching Tommy proper etiquette and table manners. Dignity, he would say, comes from how you carry yourself, not what you carry in your wallet. The local library became their sanctuary on weekends. While Tommy studied, John would quietly grade papers for his unofficial tutoring sessions using the same red pen and careful comments he'd employed for decades at Riverside. The librarians, knowing their story, often saved educational magazines for Tommy and slipped them free passes to museum exhibitions. This morning had started like any other: the quiet preparation, the careful walk to his assigned street, the methodical work of keeping the city clean. The splash of water from the passing Bentley was nothing new; such incidents were part of the job. But something about the driver's face in the rearview mirror stirred a distant memory, one that would unravel both their carefully constructed worlds. Dr. Sarah Mitchell strode through the bustling halls of New York Presbyterian Hospital, her white coat bearing the weight of countless life and death decisions. At 38, she'd become one of the city's most respected pediatric specialists, though few knew her own childhood story of watching her single mother clean offices at night to afford her medication. One of those few was John Anderson, though he remained unaware that the little girl he'd helped 25 years ago now treated his grandson Tommy. Her office walls displayed not only prestigious medical certificates, but also a faded photograph of her middle school graduation, where a much younger John Anderson stood proudly beside her. The scholarship he'd secured for her had changed everything. Now, treating Tommy for his severe asthma, she felt an inexplicable connection to the quiet, brave boy, though she couldn't quite place why his grandfather seemed so familiar in his worn street sweeper's uniform. Robert Pierce, at 65, represented everything Lucas Warren despised yet secretly feared becoming. The CEO of Pierce Industries carried his own rags to riches story, but unlike Lucas, he'd maintained a reputation for ethical business practices and employee loyalty. His current battle against Lucas's hostile takeover attempt wasn't just about business; it was about protecting the 20,000 families who depended on Pierce Industries for their livelihoods. Pierce's corner office, significantly smaller than Lucas's, displayed family photos alongside company achievements. His upcoming retirement announcement had triggered Lucas's aggressive merger attempt, though few knew the real reason behind Pierce's decision, a promise made to John Anderson 30 years ago about protecting jobs over profits. The same John Anderson who had given him his first business loan from the school's emergency fund. Emma Thompson had risen from rookie reporter to senior investigative journalist at the New York Times, driven by an unflinching dedication to truth. At 42, she'd earned a Pulitzer for exposing corporate corruption, but her current investigation into Lucas Warren's merger bid felt personally important. She'd been another of John Anderson's scholarship students, though she hadn't seen her former headmaster since graduation. Her recent tip about questionable practices at Warren Enterprises led her down a path she never expected. Her investigation had revealed surprising connections between Warren Enterprises and Pierce Industries, but more intriguingly, both CEOs had attended Riverside Academy under John Anderson's leadership. As she dug deeper, a pattern emerged of lives touched and transformed by the former headmaster, creating an intricate web of relationships that would soon collide in unexpected ways. Margaret Chen, Lucas's executive assistant for 15 years, silently observed her boss's growing isolation. Her own daughter had received an anonymous scholarship to Riverside Academy 5 years ago, though Lucas never knew she'd discovered his secret annual donations to the school. She watched him wrestle with the Pierce Industries takeover, seeing the conflict between the man he'd become and the boy who once promised his headmaster to use wealth for good. The hospital board, led by Chairman William Hayes, faced its own crisis. The pediatric wing where Dr. Mitchell worked needed crucial funding, and Lucas Warren's foundation was their last hope. Hayes had no way of knowing that his decision to pressure Dr. Mitchell for positive publicity about Warren Enterprises would set in motion a chain of events affecting everyone connected to John Anderson. Tommy Anderson, at 11, carried himself with a maturity beyond his years. His teachers marveled at his academic excellence despite his circumstances, unaware that he spent nights helping his grandfather grade papers and learning life lessons from a man who'd shaped generations. His recent science project on urban air quality, inspired by watching his grandfather work, had caught Dr. Mitchell's attention for its sophisticated analysis of pollution's effects on asthma patients. These characters orbited each other like planets around an unseen sun, their connections hidden but profound. Dr. Mitchell's daily rounds brought her past Emma Thompson, who was investigating the hospital's funding while quietly observing Lucas Warren's activities. Robert Pierce regularly walked past John Anderson's street sweeping route, never recognizing his former teacher in the humble worker. Margaret Chen watched it all from her desk outside Lucas's office, holding secrets that could change everything. The coming days would weave their stories together in ways none could predict, as a simple encounter between a billionaire and a street sweeper set in motion events that would challenge their understanding of success, loyalty, and redemption. In the heart of Manhattan, where wealth and poverty danced their daily waltz, these lives would collide and transform, guided by the invisible hand of a man who had spent his life lifting others toward their dreams. The screech of expensive tires against wet asphalt shattered the dawn silence. Lucas Warren's Bentley had come to an abrupt halt, the leather steering wheel gripped tight beneath his manicured fingers. In his rearview mirror, the image of the elderly street sweeper uniform soaked and dripping triggered something he hadn't felt in years: shame. "Sir, I'm so terribly sorry," Lucas called out, his Italian leather shoes hitting the puddle as he stepped out. His voice carried the practiced smoothness of countless business negotiations, but something felt different this time. The old man stood there, water dripping from his municipal uniform, broom still held firmly in weathered hands. "You're blocking traffic," the street sweeper responded quietly, not meeting Lucas's eyes. "Please, go ahead." "You seem to be in a hurry." The dignity in his voice struck Lucas like a physical blow. No anger, no accusations, just a gentle reminder of common courtesy. Behind them, car horns began to blare impatiently. Lucas reached for his wallet, a practiced gesture of solving problems with money. "Let me compensate you for the cleaning." I insist. He pulled out several $100 bills, but the old man stepped back, water still streaming from his cap. "Money won't dry these clothes any faster, Mr. Warren," the street sweeper replied, finally looking up. The use of his name stopped Lucas cold. Those eyes, there was something hauntingly familiar about them. The same steady gaze that had once looked over reading glasses while discussing Shakespeare and moral philosophy. Do I know you?" Lucas's voice lost its corporate polish, revealing a hint of the Bronx accent he'd spent years erasing. The morning traffic continued its angry chorus around them, but time seemed to slow in their small bubble of recognition. The street sweeper straightened his back, and for a moment, despite his soaked uniform, he carried himself with the bearing of someone else entirely. "You once promised me you'd use your gifts to make the world better, not just richer. That was quite a while ago, in a different life." The memory hit Lucas like a thunderbolt. Room 213, Riverside Academy. The oak-paneled office with its wall of books. The man who'd convinced the board to accept a scholarship student from the wrong side of town. "Mr. Anderson?" "Headmaster Anderson." A subtle nod was the only confirmation. "The merger meeting you're rushing to, it's about Pierce Industries, isn't it?" John asked, his voice carrying no judgment, only sadness. "Robert was one of yours too, you know. Class of '82, you both showed such promise." Lucas stood frozen, his expensive suit collecting droplets from the misty morning air. The contrast between them was stark: power tie and reflective vest, Italian leather and worn work boots, master of the universe and humble civil servant. Yet at this moment he felt like a teenage boy again, caught running in the hallways. "I don't understand," Lucas managed, his carefully constructed world tilting on its axis. "Why are you? How did you end up?" He couldn't finish the question, suddenly ashamed of its implications. John turned slightly, resuming his work with slow, methodical strokes of the broom. "Life gives us different paths to serve, Lucas. Sometimes the highest calling looks the lowest to passing eyes." He paused, leaning slightly on his broom. "Your meeting starts in 20 minutes. You should go." The gathered traffic had reached a crescendo of horns and shouts. Lucas's phone buzzed incessantly in his pocket, likely his assistant warning him about the time. Yet he stood there, watching his former mentor sweep the streets he once ruled. "Mr. Anderson," "Let me," Lucas started, but John cut him off with a gentle wave. "Go, Lucas. Your empire awaits." There was no bitterness in his voice, only the same patient wisdom that had guided a troubled teenager decades ago. "Just remember what you promised in my office that spring morning. About what true success means." As Lucas reluctantly returned to his car, his world had shifted imperceptibly but irrevocably. In his rear-view mirror, the dignified figure of John Anderson grew smaller, but the weight of memory and unfulfilled promises grew larger with every passing second. The leather seats of the Bentley felt suddenly uncomfortable as memories flooded Lucas's mind. Spring 1994. He sat in that oak-paneled office, a scholarship application trembling in his teenage hands. Headmaster Anderson wasn't just reviewing his grades, he was seeing something deeper, something Lucas himself hadn't yet recognized. "Your essay mentioned wanting to build things," Lucas John had said, adjusting his reading glasses. "Not just buildings or businesses, but opportunities. That's rare in someone so young." The words echoed across 3 decades, striking Lucas with their prescience. On his desk now lay the contracts that would dismantle Pierce Industries, the very antithesis of building opportunities. The flashback intensified his father's medical bills piling up, his mother's second job as a night janitor, the shame of wearing thrift store uniforms to an elite school. Then came the day everything nearly fell apart. The tuition assistance had run out mid-semester. Lucas remembered standing outside Riverside's gates, thinking it was over. But John Anderson had found a solution. "There's an emergency fund," he'd explained, opening his desk drawer. Technically, it's for facility repairs. He'd pulled out a personal checkbook instead of the school's. "Consider it an investment in the future." The check had been written from his own account, a fact Lucas had discovered years later. Now, sitting in his idling Bentley, Lucas recalled more details. The daily mentoring sessions disguised as detention to spare his pride, the donated blazer that perfectly matched his size, the college recommendation letters that opened Ivy League doors, the small kindnesses that altered the trajectory of his life. Most haunting was the graduation day conversation. Success without service is like a book full of blank pages, John had told him. "Remember, true wealth isn't what you gather, Lucas, it's what you give." He'd made a promise that day, full of youthful conviction and genuine gratitude. A promise now buried under years of hostile takeovers and profit margins. His phone buzzed again. The merger meeting was starting soon, but another memory surfaced. Robert Pierce, 2 years ahead of him at Riverside, tutoring him in calculus. The same Robert Pierce whose company he was about to dismantle. They'd both been Anderson's special projects, struggling students with potential who needed just one person to believe in them. The rain intensified, drumming against the car roof. Through the streaked windshield, Lucas could still make out John's figure methodically sweeping the sidewalk. The same methodical patience he'd shown while explaining complex moral philosophies to troubled teenagers, building character alongside academics. "What happened to you?" Lucas whispered to himself, watching his former mentor work. The question carried layers of meaning. What circumstances had brought such a great man to this humble position? But more importantly, what had happened to the grateful boy who'd promised to make his teacher proud? A text message lit up his phone. Board members getting restless. "Where are you?" Margaret. The merger documents waited in his briefcase, each page representing jobs that would be cut, families that would struggle. Families like his had been, before John Anderson changed everything. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd become successful enough to help hundreds of students like his younger self, yet instead he'd focused on building an empire that primarily served his own interests. The very antithesis of what his mentor had taught him about the responsibility of privilege. Looking at his watch, Lucas realized he had a choice to make. The merger meeting would start in 15 minutes, with or without him. But for the first time in years, the weight of an old promise felt heavier than the pull of profit margins. He reached for his phone, finger hovering over Margaret's number, as 3 decades of choices and their consequences pressed down on him like the grey Manhattan sky above. The morning's revelations were suddenly interrupted by a frantic call that pierced through the Bentley's quiet interior. It was Dr. Sarah Mitchell from Presbyterian Hospital. "Mr. Anderson? Tommy's had a severe asthma attack. The school called us 20 minutes ago." The words sent a chill through the already cold morning air. Simultaneously, Lucas's phone erupted with urgent messages. Pierce Industries had leaked news of the hostile takeover to the press. The stock market was responding, share prices fluctuating wildly. His presence at the merger meeting wasn't just expected, it was crucial. 25 years of building his empire balanced against the sight of John Anderson, now running toward the subway station, his broom abandoned on the wet sidewalk. Through his open car window, Lucas caught fragments of John's phone conversation. "No insurance. Can't afford the emergency room. Just keep him stable." The words struck him like physical blows. The bitter irony wasn't lost on him. The very hospital where Tommy lay wheezing was one where Lucas's foundation had recently withdrawn funding to facilitate the Pierce Industries takeover. Emma Thompson from the New York Times was already at the hospital, working on what she thought was a routine story about healthcare inequality. She recognized Tommy's name from her research into Riverside Academy's alumni. The pieces were starting to connect in her investigative mind as she watched the elderly street sweeper rush through the emergency room doors, still in his wet uniform. Dr. Mitchell's heart sank as she recognized her former headmaster in the distressed grandfather. The same man who'd secured her scholarship, changed her life, now stood before her unable to afford his grandson's treatment. Her pager buzzed. The hospital board wanted an update on potential donors for the pediatric wing. Warren Enterprises was supposed to be their salvation, but the merger news had thrown everything into chaos. Outside the hospital, Robert Pierce was arriving for his regular board meeting when he spotted John Anderson in the waiting room. The recognition was immediate and devastating. "My God, John," he whispered, watching his former mentor fill out financial assistance forms with trembling hands. The same hands that had once signed his college recommendation letters. But Lucas sat in his idle car, watching his phone explode with notifications. CNN was covering the merger. His board was demanding his presence. Years of careful planning were reaching their climax. Yet all he could see was John Anderson's dignified figure disappearing into the hospital entrance, carrying the weight of broken promises and abandoned principles. Margaret Chen's voice cut through his thoughts via speakerphone. "Lucas, the board is threatening to proceed without you. Everything we've worked for is at risk." She paused, then added softly, "But there's something else you should know. That hospital, it's where your foundation's largest donation was supposed to go, the one we diverted for the merger fund." The morning's rain had turned into a proper storm, matching the turbulence of colliding worlds. Through the hospital's glass doors, Lucas could see Emma Thompson interviewing hospital staff, Dr. Mitchell rushing between rooms, and Robert Pierce standing frozen in recognition of his former teacher. At the center of it all, John Anderson sat in a plastic chair, head bowed, decades of sacrifices and service culminating in this moment of crisis. The clock on Lucas's dashboard showed 9:15 a.m. The merger meeting had started without him. His empire teetered on the brink, stock prices fluctuated with each passing minute, and the press was already spinning narratives about corporate greed. Yet here, in the rain-soaked streets, where his former headmaster swept each morning, something more valuable than money hung in the balance: the chance to finally keep a promise made in an oak-paneled office 25 years ago. John Anderson's selfless dedication to others deserves 1,000 likes, yet his story awaits its first one. Perhaps you'll be the first to honor such quiet dignity with a simple click. The hospital's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Lucas's face as he stood outside Tommy's room, watching John Anderson hold his grandson's hand through an oxygen mask. His phone vibrated continuously. The merger meeting was in chaos. Robert Pierce had just announced he would rather liquidate his company than let it fall into Warren Enterprises' hands. "The board is voting in 10 minutes," Margaret's voice crackled through his earpiece. "They're discussing removing you as CEO if you don't appear. Everything we built," Lucas, she paused, her voice softening. "The Asian markets are already responding. We're losing millions every minute." Through the window, Lucas watched Dr. Sarah Mitchell explain something to John, who seemed to age years with each word. The cost of emergency treatment, the need for specialized medication, the importance of preventive care they clearly couldn't afford. Lucas recognized the same look on John's face that his own father had worn decades ago, the helpless anguish of a man unable to protect his child. His company's legal team was texting frantically. The SEC investigation into Pierce Industries had leaked to the press. It was the perfect ammunition to force the merger, the moment he'd been waiting for. 20,000 jobs hung in the balance, not just executive positions, but clerks, janitors, maintenance staff, people with families, with children like Tommy. Sir, a young nurse interrupted his thoughts. "Mr. Anderson is asking about payment plans." She held a stack of forms, each page representing thousands of dollars they didn't have. "Hospital policy requires at least a partial payment before continuing specialized treatment." Lucas's hand moved toward his wallet, then stopped. A simple check could solve this immediate crisis, but the gesture felt hollow. John Anderson hadn't just written him a check. All those years ago he'd invested time, faith, and unwavering support. Money alone couldn't repay that kind of debt. Robert Pierce's voice suddenly boomed from the hospital lobby. "Where is he? Where's John?" The commanding figure of Pierce Industries, CEO, pushed through the double doors, his face flushed with emotion. "My God, I've been looking for you for years. Why didn't you tell me?" The scene unfolding before Lucas grew more complex. Robert Pierce, his longtime business rival, knelt beside John Anderson's chair, gripping his former teacher's hand. The same hands that had once guided them both toward their dreams were now worn from years of manual labor. Lucas's phone lit up with breaking news: Warren Enterprises accused of manipulating evidence in Pierce investigation, Emma Thompson's byline. The story was spreading across all major networks. His carefully constructed plan was unraveling, yet for the first time in years, the prospect of losing everything didn't terrify him. "They're starting the vote." Margaret's voice wavered. "Lucas, please. We can fix the hospital bills later. The company needs you now." The desperation in her voice reflected years of shared struggles and victories. She'd been there through every step of building his empire. Tommy's wheezing had subsided slightly, but his small hand clutched his grandfather's uniform as if afraid he'd disappear. John Anderson sat straight-backed, despite his soaked clothes, maintaining the same dignity he'd shown on school grounds decades ago. He wasn't asking for help, he never did. The choice before Lucas crystallized: walk away now, save his company, maintain his power, and find some way to make amends later. Or stay, risk everything he'd built, and finally become the man his mentor had believed he could be. The man he'd promised to become. His thumb hovered over his phone screen. One call could set either path in motion. Through the window, he caught John Anderson's reflection, not as the street sweeper he'd become, but as the headmaster he'd been, standing before a classroom of eager minds, teaching them that character revealed itself not in moments of comfort, but in moments of choice. The board meeting was reaching its climax. Pierce Industries' fate hung by a thread, his own company's future balanced on a knife's edge, and in a small hospital room, a boy fought to breathe while his grandfather fought to maintain hope. All paths leading back to one man who'd spent his life lifting others up, now needing someone to do the same for him. Lucas Warren, the boy from the Bronx who'd become a billionaire, faced the kind of moment no spreadsheet could solve. The kind of moment John Anderson had prepared him for, though he hadn't realized it until now. John Anderson's cough echoed through the hospital corridor, a deep, rattling sound he could no longer disguise. "Doctor." Sarah Mitchell watched her former headmaster struggle to maintain his composure as he held Tommy's hand, noticing the blue tinge to his lips and the way his shoulders hunched with each labored breath. "Mr. Anderson," she said softly, "we need to talk about your own condition." The x-rays on her tablet told a story she'd seen too many times. Years of pre-dawn work in cold, polluted air had taken their toll. The shadows in his lungs weren't just pneumonia, they suggested something far more sinister. But John shook his head, his focus entirely on Tommy. "Later, doctor. Right now my grandson needs." The sentence was cut short by another coughing fit, this one bringing him to his knees. Robert Pierce rushed to support him, while Lucas watched from the doorway, the weight of years of ignored responsibility crushing down. "Stage 3, Dr. Mitchell explained quietly to the gathered men once John had been helped to a chair. Likely occupational lung cancer, exacerbated by working in all-weather conditions. He's known for at least 6 months, according to his records from the free clinic." She paused, letting the information sink in. He refused treatment because he couldn't afford both that and Tommy's asthma medication. The revelation hit Lucas like a physical blow. 6 months of watching his former mentor sweep the streets, slowly dying, while he'd driven past in his luxury car. Robert Pierce gripped the back of a chair until his knuckles went white, remembering the man who'd once stayed late after school to help him understand economics. "The cold and wet have accelerated the progression," Dr. Mitchell continued professionally, though her voice trembled slightly. "This morning's exposure," she glanced at Lucas, who flinched at the reference to the splashed water. "It's triggered an acute respiratory crisis. He needs immediate intervention." Through the window of Tommy's room, they could see John attempting to hide his handkerchief spotted with blood from his grandson's view. His hands shook as he straightened Tommy's blanket, still performing his duties as a caregiver despite his own crisis. The same hands that had once written college recommendations, now trembling with the effort of simply holding a glass of water. A young nurse appeared with admission forms, but John waved them away. "I need to get back to work," he insisted, attempting to stand. "The morning shift isn't over, and Tommy needs his medicine." His legs buckled, and only Robert Pierce's quick reaction prevented him from falling. "You've spent your life catching everyone else when they fell," Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. "Let us catch you now, John." But the proud former headmaster straightened his wet uniform, years of ingrained dignity fighting against physical weakness. The monitor tracking Tommy's oxygen levels beeped steadily in the background as John's own breathing grew more labored. Dr. Mitchell moved to insert an IV, but he pulled away. The bills he started to protest, but she cut him off with uncharacteristic sharpness. "You paid for my first stethoscope," she reminded him, tears threatening to break her professional demeanor. "When my mother couldn't afford my medical school application fees, you found a way. Now please let me help you." Lucas watched the scene unfold, remembering countless similar moments in that oak-paneled office. How many lives had John Anderson saved, shaped, or changed? How many dreams had he made possible through quiet sacrifice? And now he sat dying, his only concern still for others. The irony was unbearable. The pediatric wing that could have had better equipment, the research funding that could have developed better treatments, all sacrificed for Lucas's corporate ambitions. The same ambitions John Anderson had encouraged, believing his former student would use them for good. A text message lit up Lucas's phone board. "Vote in 5 minutes. Final chance," but the words seemed meaningless as he watched his mentor's shoulders shake with suppressed coughs, watched the man who'd taught him about moral courage demonstrated one final time. "Your oxygen levels are dangerously low," Dr. Mitchell insisted, finally managing to attach a pulse oximeter to John's finger. The numbers confirmed her worst fears. "We need to admit you now." Her voice carried the authority of the profession he'd helped make possible for her. John Anderson looked up at his former students, now a CEO, a business leader, and a doctor gathered around him in this sterile hospital room. For a moment his eyes held the same steady wisdom they'd had decades ago before another coughing fit doubled him over. "Tommy First," he gasped between coughs. "Promise me." Tommy First, the words carried the same unwavering dedication to others that had defined his entire life, even as his own slipped away. As dawn broke over Manhattan, the story exploded across social media platforms. Emma Thompson's initial article in the New York Times Street Sweepers Sacrifice, The Hidden Cost of Corporate Greed, ignited a firestorm that even Warren Enterprises' elite PR team couldn't contain. Breaking billionaire CEO splashes former headmaster turned street sweeper, ignores critical medical conditions, screamed the headlines. Security camera footage from a nearby building had captured the morning's incident, and within hours the video had gone viral. The image of John Anderson, dignified even in his soaked uniform, became a powerful symbol of America's widening social divide. This isn't just about one man, Emma Thompson argued on CNN's morning show. It's about a system that forces educators to become street sweepers, that puts profit margins above human dignity. The same company trying to acquire Pierce Industries recently pulled funding from the hospital's pediatric wing, the very wing where this dedicated grandfather now fights for his life. Social media erupted with hashtags Justice for John, Warren Enterprises Profits Over People, and Remember Riverside. Former students of John Anderson began sharing their stories online. A viral thread from a successful surgeon detailed how Anderson had paid for her SAT tests from his own pocket. A prominent judge revealed how the former headmaster had worked weekends to provide extra tutoring. Inside the hospital, reporters gathered in growing numbers. Robert Pierce's emotional outburst in the lobby had been captured on smartphones and was now trending. "This man shaped generations of leaders, and we let him sweep our streets. What does that say about us?" The raw pain in his voice resonated across political divides. Fox Business focused on the merger implications. Warren Enterprises stock plummets amid social media backlash. CNBC debated the broader implications, corporate social responsibility in the age of viral accountability. The story touched a nerve in a nation increasingly concerned about wealth inequality and healthcare access. Conservative commentators defended Lucas' job creation versus social media sob stories. Liberal outlets countered with investigations into Warren Enterprises' history of hospital funding cuts. The debate raged across cable news, with pundits arguing about everything from educational funding to corporate ethics. Sources claim Warren skipped crucial merger vote to remain at hospital, Bloomberg reported. Wall Street analysts began questioning Lucas's leadership. Can a CEO prioritize personal moral obligations over fiduciary duty? The question sparked heated debates in business schools and boardrooms across the country. Local news crews interviewed Tommy's classmates and teachers. The story of his academic excellence despite hardship, his grandfather's dawn shifts, and their one-room apartment touched hearts nationwide. A crowdfunding campaign for Tommy's medical expenses reached six figures within hours, though John Anderson, even in his hospital bed, insisted the money go to other families in need. Dr. Sarah Mitchell's connection to the story emerged. Former scholarship student, now chief of pediatrics, treats mentor. The hospital's board squirmed under scrutiny of their funding decisions. Anonymous sources revealed the complex web of financial maneuvering that had prioritized corporate mergers over medical care. Warren Enterprises shareholders demanded answers. The company's carefully crafted image as a socially responsible corporation crumbled under the weight of emerging details. Internal emails leaked, showing discussions about the hospital funding cuts. Each revelation fueled new waves of public outrage. Robert Pierce seized the moment, announcing Pierce Industries would establish a foundation for aging educators. "We built our fortunes on the foundation of their sacrifice," he declared. "It's time we acknowledged that debt." The announcement sent Pierce Industries stock soaring while Warren Enterprises continued to decline. Margaret Chen watched the chaos unfold from Lucas's office, fielding calls from angry board members and concerned investors. The narrative was spinning beyond control. Every attempt to manage the story only seemed to fuel public interest. Decades of corporate maneuvering were being undone by a simple act of human neglect. By evening, the story had gone international. British tabloids juxtaposed photos of Lucas's penthouse with John's modest apartment. Japanese newspapers praised the honorable street sweeper. European commentators cited the case as an example of American capitalism's failures. Emma Thompson's follow-up piece revealed more John Anderson's history of quiet philanthropy, the students he'd helped, the lives he'd changed. Against this backdrop of selfless service, Lucas Warren's corporate achievements seemed hollow. The contrast painted a devastating picture of values lost and promises forgotten. As night fell over the city, Bimorite John trended worldwide. In the harsh glare of public attention, a simple encounter between a billionaire and a street sweeper had become a mirror reflecting society's choices and challenges. The story touched something deep in the public consciousness, a recognition that true worth couldn't be measured in stock prices or profit margins. The fluorescent lights of Presbyterian Hospital cast long shadows as Emma Thompson methodically pinned documents to her office's corkboard, connecting threads between faces and dates. What had started as a simple story about healthcare inequality had unveiled a tapestry of interconnected lives, all leading back to room 213 at Riverside Academy. "Look at this," she said to Dr. Mitchell, who had stopped by during her break. A yellowed newspaper clipping from 1994 showed a young John Anderson standing beside a group of scholarship students. He didn't just help students randomly. There was a pattern: kids with potential but facing impossible odds. Like us. Dr. Mitchell leaned closer, recognizing faces that had become prominent figures: surgeons, judges, executives. Robert Pierce in his graduation gown, Lucas Warren clutching a debate trophy, herself holding a science fair medal. Behind each success story stood John Anderson, his proud smile unchanging across decades of photographs. More connections emerged as Emma dug deeper. The emergency fund that had saved Lucas from dropping out. It was created with John Anderson's inheritance after his wife's death. The scholarship that sent Robert Pierce to business school, funded by Anderson's decision to sell his family's lake house. Each discovery revealed new layers of sacrifice that their mentor had kept hidden. A maintenance worker passing by stopped, staring at the photos. "That's him, the guy who tutored my kid last year. Lives in the apartment building where I work. Never charged a dime." He pointed to a recent picture of John in his street sweeper's uniform. "Stays up late helping kids with homework. Didn't know he used to be somebody important." More stories flooded in as word spread through the hospital. A cafeteria worker recalled John sharing his lunch with homeless people during his morning shifts. A nurse remembered him reading stories to children in the pediatric ward during his breaks. The street sweeper's route, they realized, wasn't random. It passed by schools, shelters, and hospitals where he could quietly continue his life's work of helping others. Lucas, watching from Tommy's doorway, felt memories surface with each new revelation. The time Anderson had found a winter coat that perfectly fit him. The extra sandwiches that appeared on his desk during lunch. The college application fees mysteriously waived at crucial moments. All these years he'd attributed his rise to his own brilliance and determination. The truth was humbling. Robert Pierce added his own pieces to the puzzle. "Remember that scholarship fund we thought the school board created?" he said, his voice thick with emotion. It was John. He took a second job as a night watchman to fund it. Told everyone the money came from anonymous donors. The successful businessman's hands trembled as he held up old bank statements showing regular deposits from Anderson's personal account. Dr. Mitchell discovered medical records revealing more sacrifices. John had been diagnosed with early-stage cancer 3 years ago, right when Tommy's expensive asthma treatments began. The timing of his switch to street sweeping coincided exactly with Tommy's first major hospitalization. He'd chosen the early morning shift specifically so he could attend Tommy's medical appointments in the afternoons. A former Riverside teacher, now retired, visited the hospital with a box of old files. Inside were hundreds of letters John had written to colleges, employers, and scholarship committees on behalf of his students. Each letter demonstrated his remarkable ability to see potential where others saw only circumstances. He kept copies, the teacher explained, to ensure he never repeated the same phrase. He wanted each recommendation to be as unique as the student. As the day progressed, more former students arrived, drawn by the news stories. A janitor recognized his night school math teacher in John's photo. A security guard remembered the man who'd helped his daughter apply for nursing school. Each carried a story of quiet intervention, of hope offered when it was needed most. Margaret Chen, still managing the corporate crisis from Lucas's office, found her own connection: the anonymous donor who'd funded her daughter's Riverside scholarship. The handwriting on the check matched John Anderson's signature on Lucas's old recommendation letter. Even after retiring, he'd continued finding ways to open doors for others. Emma's investigation revealed a pattern spanning decades. During his years as headmaster, John had created a network of former students in key positions: doctors, lawyers, executives who could help newer students in need. He'd maintained detailed records of who could provide what assistance, creating a web of support that continued functioning long after he'd stepped down. But the most poignant discovery came from Tommy himself. While the adults pieced together his grandfather's past, the boy showed Emma his prized possession, the handmade book of daily notes his grandfather had written him. Each message contained not just encouragement, but subtle lessons drawn from John's years of teaching. He was still shaping young minds, even from behind a street sweeper's broom. The wall of Emma's office became a testament to a life spent in service to others. Photos, documents, and testimonials painted a picture of a man who had viewed success not as personal achievement, but as increased capacity to help others. John Anderson hadn't just taught subjects, he'd built bridges, opened doors, and quietly changed the trajectory of countless lives. Lucas stood before this wall of evidence, his corporate empire suddenly feeling insignificant compared to his former mentor's legacy of compassion. Every connection revealed, every story shared, added to the weight of unfulfilled promises and forgotten lessons. The true measure of success, he realized, wasn't in what you gained, but in what you gave. And by that measure, the street sweeper in the hospital bed had achieved more than the billionaire ever had: copyrighty. The hospital corridor buzzed with increasing tension as Dr. Mitchell studied the latest test results. Tommy's asthma attack had triggered complications, requiring specialized treatment that stretched far beyond John Anderson's means. Meanwhile, his own condition deteriorated rapidly, the years of exposure to morning pollution and winter cold accelerating the cancer's progression. "We need to make a decision about treatment options," Dr. Mitchell explained to Lucas and Robert Pierce, her voice professional despite her personal connection. "Mr. Anderson's cancer requires immediate intervention. The delay in treatment has allowed it to spread. And Tommy..." She paused, glancing at the boy's room. "Tommy needs long-term specialized care. The combination of medications alone costs more than most people's monthly salary." The hospital's financial office had sent up the preliminary bills numbers that seemed to mock John's life of sacrifice. Robert Pierce paced the corridor, his own company's fate forgotten in the face of his mentor's crisis. "There has to be a way," he muttered, running calculations in his head. "We can't let him die sweeping streets." Lucas's phone wouldn't stop vibrating. His board had voted to remove him as CEO if he didn't return within the hour. Warren Enterprises stock had plummeted 30% since morning, erasing billions in market value. The SEC investigation into the Pierce Industries takeover was expanding to include questions about hospital funding. His carefully constructed world was unraveling thread by thread. But in Tommy's room, John struggled to maintain his composure as another coughing fit racked his body. "Promise me," he wheezed to Dr. Mitchell, "whatever happens, Tommy's treatment comes first." The pulse oximeter beeped warnings as his oxygen levels dropped dangerously low, but he refused to leave his grandson's side. Emma Thompson's latest article had triggered a federal investigation into healthcare funding patterns at major hospitals. The spotlight on Presbyterian's board revealed uncomfortable connections between corporate donations and treatment priorities. Dr. Mitchell faced increasing pressure to distance herself from the story, her own career suddenly at risk. Down in the lobby, protesters had begun gathering. Healthcare is a human rights signs mingled with Warren Enterprises' profit over people placards. Local news crews captured the growing crowd, which included former Riverside students, healthcare activists, and union members from Pierce Industries. Margaret Chen called with worse news major shareholders were demanding an emergency board meeting. The merger wasn't just failing, it was dragging both companies into a PR nightmare. Robert Pierce's company faced a hostile takeover from overseas investors seeking to exploit the chaos. 20,000 jobs hung by a thread. The hospital board convened an emergency session, concerned about the facility's reputation. Some members pushed to transfer John and Tommy to a public hospital, citing capacity issues. Others worried about the optics of turning away a patient who had become a symbol of healthcare inequality. Dr. Mitchell fought back tears as she reviewed John's latest scans. The cancer had spread more aggressively than initially thought. Without immediate treatment, his prognosis was measured in weeks, not months. Tommy's condition, while stabilized, required long-term care that would bankrupt most families. In the midst of this crisis, John Anderson maintained his dignity. Between labored breaths, he continued tutoring Tommy from his hospital bed, turning medical terminology into impromptu vocabulary lessons. The same dedication that had shaped generations of students remained unbroken, even as his body failed him. Lucas stood at the window, watching the crowd below grow larger. His phone displayed a text from his lawyer. The SEC wanted to interview him about the hospital funding decisions. His corporate legal team was deserting him, unwilling to risk their reputations. The empire he'd built over decades was crumbling in a matter of hours. The hospital's financial office sent up more forms, each page representing impossible choices: John's cancer treatment or Tommy's asthma medication, emergency interventions or preventive care. A lifetime of serving others had left their savior unable to save himself or protect his grandson. Robert Pierce received word that his board was meeting secretly with potential buyers. The company he'd built, following John Anderson's principles of ethical business, faced dismemberment by corporate raiders. The cruel irony wasn't lost on him. Their mentor's illness might destroy everything he'd taught them to build. Outside Tommy's room, Dr. Mitchell confronted the hospital administrator. "These are human beings, not budget items," she argued, her voice carrying down the corridor. "After everything he's given to this community." But the administrator's response was bureaucratic and cold. "The hospital can't operate on gratitude." The day's light faded, but the challenges intensified. John's oxygen levels continued dropping. Tommy's medication schedule required costly adjustments. Lucas's company faced class action lawsuits. Pierce Industries stock entered free fall. Dr. Mitchell's department faced budget cuts. Every hour brought new complications, new impossible choices. In this storm of crises, John Anderson's quiet voice rose above the chaos. Life's greatest tests, he told Tommy between breathing treatments, aren't measured in dollars or victories. They're measured in how we help others during their darkest moments. The words carried echoes of lessons taught in room 213, lessons his successful students had somehow forgotten while pursuing their ambitions. The hospital room became a crucible where long-established relationships transformed under the heat of crisis. Lucas Warren, the billionaire CEO, found himself perched awkwardly on a plastic chair beside Tommy's bed, watching the boy solve algebra problems between breathing treatments. For the first time in decades, he wasn't seeing a financial opportunity or a PR challenge. He was seeing John Anderson's legacy in its purest form. "My grandfather says you were his best student," Tommy mentioned casually, his young voice muffled by the oxygen mask. He keeps your graduation photo in his drawer at home. The simple statement hit Lucas harder than any corporate takeover. John had remained proud of him, even as he'd strayed so far from the values his mentor had instilled. Robert Pierce, usually commanding boardrooms with authority, sat quietly in the corner, grading papers John had been carrying in his worn backpack. Each sheet revealed careful comments in John's distinctive handwriting, encouraging words for struggling students from the neighborhood. "He's still teaching," Robert whispered, his voice thick with emotion. All these years, he never stopped. Dr. Sarah Mitchell found her professional distance crumbling as she treated the man who'd made her career possible. Every time she entered the room, she fought the urge to call him Headmaster Anderson instead of Mr. Anderson. The strict hospital protocols she'd always followed seemed inadequate for the person who'd taught her the true meaning of care. The evolving dynamics spread beyond the hospital room. Margaret Chen, still managing Lucas's corporate crisis, began leaving her office every evening to tutor at the community center where John volunteered. "He showed us a different way to measure success," she explained to bewildered colleagues. "It's time we honored that." Emma Thompson's relationship with her story changed as well. What had started as an investigation into corporate wrongdoing became a deeply personal exploration of influence and obligation. Each interview revealed new facets of John Anderson's impact, forcing her to confront her own role in perpetuating or challenging systemic inequalities. Tommy, wise beyond his years, became the unexpected bridge between these colliding worlds. He shared his grandfather's wisdom with Lucas during their impromptu math sessions, told Dr. Mitchell's stories about John's nighttime tutoring, and showed Robert Pierce's collection of handwritten encouragement notes. Through his eyes, they rediscovered the mentor they'd forgotten. The hospital staff witnessed their own relationship dynamics shift. Nurses who had initially seen John as just another uninsured patient began leaving textbooks in his room for the students who visited him. The cleaning crew adjusted their schedule to avoid disturbing his evening tutoring sessions. Even the stern hospital administrator found herself lingering during rounds, drawn into discussions about education and opportunity. Lucas and Robert, longtime business rivals, found their relationship transforming through their shared concern for their former teacher. The hostile takeover plans that had consumed them now seemed trivial compared to ensuring John received proper care. They began sharing meals in the hospital cafeteria, reminiscing about lessons learned in room 213, rediscovering the brotherhood John had tried to instill. Dr. Mitchell's relationship with her profession underwent its own evolution. Treating John forced her to confront the gap between medical capability and healthcare accessibility. She began advocating in board meetings, challenging policies that prioritized profit over patient care, channeling the courage John had helped her discover as a scholarship student. The most profound transformation occurred in Tommy's relationship with his grandfather's former students. He became their living reminder of what John Anderson had tried to teach them about responsibility and compassion. Each interaction with the boy forced them to measure their lives against the standards their mentor had set. John himself, even as his health declined, continued shaping these relationships from his hospital bed. Between breathing treatments, he mediated conversations between Lucas and Robert about corporate responsibility. During checkups, he asked Dr. Mitchell about her research, encouraging her as he had decades ago. Every interaction carried the same purpose that had defined his career, helping others grow. The hospital room became a kind of classroom, echoing the spirit of room 213. Business rivals learned to collaborate, doctors remembered their calling, journalists discovered their conscience, and a young boy witnessed the power of his grandfather's legacy. The relationships that had calcified in corporate boardrooms and hospital bureaucracies began to soften and reshape themselves. Most significantly, Lucas's relationship with his own success underwent a fundamental transformation. Watching John maintain his dignity and purpose despite everything, he began to understand what his mentor had tried to teach him about true wealth. The billions in his accounts seemed hollow compared to the richness of John's impact on lives. These evolving relationships rippled outward. Margaret's tutoring inspired other executives to volunteer. Dr. Mitchell's advocacy encouraged other doctors to question policies. Emma's reporting prompted other journalists to explore stories of quiet heroism. Through their transformed connections, John Anderson's influence continued to multiply, even as his physical strength waned. By week's end, the hospital room had become a kind of sacred space where titles and achievements fell away, leaving only the essential connections John had always valued. The lessons he'd tried to teach about human dignity, responsibility, and service began to take root again in hearts that had forgotten them in the pursuit of success. The morning sun cast long shadows across Manhattan's financial district as Lucas Warren faced the most crucial decision of his career. The emergency board meeting of Warren Enterprises was scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp, while across town John Anderson's condition had taken a critical turn overnight. The timing wasn't coincidental. Corporate raiders often struck when they sensed weakness. "The Asian markets are in freefall," Margaret's voice crackled through his phone. "Our major shareholders are jumping ship. Pierce Industries board is meeting simultaneously to vote on dissolution rather than accept the takeover. It's now or never, Lucas." Her voice carried the weight of 20 years building an empire together. The numbers were staggering. Warren Enterprises had lost 40% of its market value in just days. The Pierce Industries merger, once valued at $8.2 billion, was crumbling. Class action lawsuits from shareholders threatened to drain billions more. The financial press was calling it the Anderson effect, how one street sweeper's story had triggered a corporate avalanche. Lucas stood in the hospital corridor, his bespoke suit wrinkled from a sleepless night. Through the window, he could see John teaching Tommy about percentages, using his own declining oxygen levels as real-world examples. Even facing death, the man remained an educator first. So his legal team texted urgently, "The SEC investigators are in the boardroom. They're questioning the hospital funding diversion. If you don't appear to defend the decisions, criminal charges could be filed." The message blinked accusingly on his screen, each word a testament to choices he'd made while forgetting his mentor's lessons. Robert Pierce arrived, his own crisis evident in his haggard appearance. "Foreign investors," he explained grimly. "They're exploiting the chaos. If both our companies fall, 20,000 families lose everything. Pensions, healthcare, futures all gone." The weight of responsibility pressed down on both men as they watched their former teacher struggle for breath. Dr. Mitchell approached with the latest test results. "The experimental treatment we discussed," she said quietly, "it could save him. But it's not covered by any insurance, and the hospital board won't approve charity care given the current scrutiny." The cost, she quoted, would barely dent Lucas's wealth, but corporate law prevented him from using company funds without board approval. The protesters outside had grown into thousands. News helicopters circled the hospital, capturing the scene as union members from both companies joined healthcare activists. The crowd's chants echoed through the corridors, "People over profits," and "Remember room 213. Lucas's phone buzzed again. The board meeting was starting. On the screen, he watched Warren Enterprises' stock price tick lower with each passing minute. Years of strategic acquisitions, carefully cultivated relationships, and meticulously planned expansions were unraveling while he stood in a hospital corridor. Margaret's voice carried desperation. "Now the vice president is ready to present evidence that the hospital funding decisions were made without your knowledge. You could save the company, protect your position. Just let him take the fall." The suggestion hung in the air, a tempting escape route that would have seemed natural just days ago. Through the window, John's monitoring equipment beeped warnings as his oxygen levels dropped again. Tommy held his grandfather's hand, still working on math problems, his young voice carrying through the door like you always say, "Grandpa, it's not about having the right answers, it's about doing the right thing." The boardroom awaited Lucas's defense of his actions. The SEC investigators had questions about financial transactions. Shareholders demanded explanations for their losses. The corporate machine he'd built required its creator's presence to survive this crisis. A nurse hurried past with more medication for John. The street sweeper's uniform still hung in the room's small closet, a silent testament to dignity maintained through adversity. Decades of lessons taught in room 213 seemed to echo in its worn fabric. Lucas's empire was crumbling. The merger was failing. His position as CEO hung by a thread. 20,000 jobs depended on his next decision. The financial press waited to report his response. Legal teams stood ready to document his choice. The business world held its breath. In room 213, John Anderson had taught them that character revealed itself not in moments of success, but in moments of choice. Now, in a sterile hospital corridor, his former student faced exactly such a moment. The decision before Lucas would define not just his future, but his understanding of what success truly meant. The clock struck 9. The board meeting began. Lucas Warren, billionaire CEO, student of John Anderson, stood at the crossroads of everything he'd built and everything he'd forgotten. His phone continued to buzz with urgent messages, each one demanding he choose between his empire and his conscience. Through the window, John Anderson's oxygen levels continued to fall. The experimental treatment waited for funding approval. The street sweeper's story had shaken the foundations of corporate America, and now the tremors threatened to bring down the very success he'd inspired his students to achieve. The moment of decision had arrived. The monitors erupted in a cacophony of alarms at 9:17 a.m. John Anderson's oxygen levels plummeted as his overtaxed lungs finally betrayed him. "Doctor." Mitchell burst into the room, her professional demeanor cracking at the sight of her former mentor gasping for air, his fingers clutched around Tommy's small hand. Code blue. Room 437, her voice carried the authority of years of training, but beneath it trembled the fear of the scholarship student she'd once been. The crash team responded instantly, their efficient movements a choreography of urgent care. Tommy was gently but firmly guided from the room, his face pale with understanding beyond his years. Multiple organ failure, Dr. Mitchell reported as Lucas and Robert rushed to the door. The cancer spread to his lungs is accelerating, complicated by this morning's pneumonia. Her eyes met Lucas's accusingly. The morning when he'd splashed water on her dying mentor seemed a lifetime ago, though barely 12 hours had passed. The room filled with medical personnel and equipment. John's street sweeper's uniform, still damp from the morning's incident, hung like a silent witness in the corner. Through gaps in the medical team's urgent movements, Lucas caught glimpses of his former teacher's face. Even now, John's expression held no blame, only a serene acceptance that somehow made everything worse. "We need to intubate a resident," announced, preparing the equipment. But John raised a trembling hand in protest, pointing weakly at a document on his bedside table. Dr. Mitchell picked it up, her hands shaking as she read. "DNR," she whispered. "He signed it this morning while everyone was distracted with Tommy's treatment." Robert Pierce slammed his fist against the wall. "Damn your pride, John. Let us help you for once." But they all understood John Anderson would face death as he'd faced life, choosing the welfare of others over his own. The document had a note attached to use any available funds for Tommy's care. Outside the room, Tommy sat with his back against the wall, solving the math problems his grandfather had assigned just hours earlier. He said finishing my education was more important than anything else, the boy explained to a nurse who tried to lead him away. "He made me promise." The medical team worked frantically despite the DNR, administering every treatment that didn't violate John's explicit wishes. Dr. Mitchell barked orders with tears streaming down her face, her years of medical training battling with her personal connection to the patient. The experimental treatment she'd mentioned earlier sat tantalizingly out of reach, unauthorized and unfunded. But through the window, Lucas could see the crowd of protesters below had grown silent, As if sensing the drama unfolding above, news crews pointed their cameras at the hospital windows, their lenses seeking the human story behind the corporate headlines. The morning sun cast John's shadow long across the sterile hospital floor, a teacher still, teaching his final lesson about dignity and choice. BP's dropping, a nurse announced. O2 Sats critical. The monitors painted a clear picture of a body that had given everything it had to give. John's eyes remained clear and focused, though, moving between the faces of his former students gathered at his bedside. His lips moved, trying to form words through the oxygen mask. Dr. Mitchell leaned closer, then straightened with fresh tears. "He's asking about the morning's tutoring schedule," she said, her voice breaking. "He wants to make sure someone will help his students prepare for their exams." Even now, his thoughts were for others. The room filled with a strange kind of peace as John reached for Tommy's homework folder with trembling hands. He pointed to the day's assignments, then looked meaningfully at Lucas and Robert. The message was clear. He expected them to continue his work, to guide and support as he had done. "Starting to code," someone announced. The machine's warnings became more insistent. Dr. Mitchell moved with professional efficiency while tears ran down her face. The experimental treatment authorization form sat unsigned on the counter, its potential salvation now irrelevant in the face of John's choices. Through it all, John Anderson maintained the same dignified presence that had commanded respect in room 213. His eyes held the same steady wisdom that had guided generations of students. Even as his body failed, his spirit continued teaching about courage, about priorities, about facing the ultimate test with grace. The morning light caught the water spots on his street sweeper's uniform, creating a pattern that looked almost like stars. The man who had lifted so many others toward their dreams was making his final choice, one last lesson about putting others first, about maintaining dignity in the face of destiny, about the true meaning of success. As the monitors recorded John Anderson's fading heartbeat, his last conscious gesture was to reach for the math worksheet Tommy had been working on. A lifetime of teaching, of serving, of sacrificing distilled into one final moment of caring about a child's education. In his final breath, he was exactly who he had always been. The news of John Anderson's critical condition exploded across media platforms with unprecedented force. CNN broke into regular programming with a split screen, the hospital entrance crowded with protesters on one side, Warren Enterprises' plummeting stock ticker on the other. The headline scrolled relentlessly: "Dying street sweeper reveals America's broken promises." "This is no longer just a business story," Emma Thompson argued on MSNBC, her voice carrying the weight of personal connection. "This is about who we are as a society. A man who shaped thousands of successful lives is dying because he chose his grandson's medicine over his own cancer treatment. Meanwhile, the student he once helped sits in a boardroom, deciding whether to save his company or his conscience." Social media erupted with John Anderson's last lesson trending worldwide. Former students shared stories that painted a devastating picture of sacrificial love. A Supreme Court justice tweeted about the lunch money John had found for her daily. A Silicon Valley CEO posted his detention slip, where John had written, "Brilliant mind, must learn to use it for others, not just himself." Fox Business struggled to maintain the corporate perspective. Warren Enterprises faces unprecedented crisis as CEO abandons crucial merger vote. But even their hardened financial analysts found themselves moved by footage of Tommy doing homework in the hospital corridor, his grandfather's teaching philosophy evident in every careful solution. Outside Presbyterian Hospital, the crowd had swelled to thousands. Union workers from Pierce Industries stood shoulder to shoulder with Warren Enterprises employees, their corporate rivalries forgotten in the face of a greater truth. They held candles in the morning light, creating a sea of flames below John Anderson's window. Robert Pierce's emotional breakdown played on repeat across networks. "We built empires on the foundation of his wisdom, then left him sweeping the streets beneath our towers." The raw pain in his voice resonated across political divides. forcing uncomfortable conversations about success, responsibility, and the true cost of corporate achievement. The hospital's PR team struggled to manage the media circus as celebrities began weighing in. A famous actor recalled John Anderson substituting in his high school drama class, encouraging him to pursue his dreams despite poverty. A pop star revealed the former headmaster had paid for her first music lessons. Each story added fuel to the growing firestorm. Financial networks dissected the implications as both Warren Enterprises and Pierce Industries faced existential crises. The Anderson effect became shorthand for corporate responsibility failures, with experts predicting long-term changes in how companies balance profit against social impact. Asian markets continued their decline as the story spread globally. Dr. Sarah Mitchell's press conference, intended to provide a medical update, turned emotional as she revealed her own connection to the patient. "He taught us that success without service is failure in disguise," she said, her professional composure cracking. "Now he's teaching us one final lesson about dignity and sacrifice." Inside the hospital, journalists jostled for position, their cameras capturing the stream of successful professionals arriving to pay respects to their former mentor. Each new arrival added another layer to the story. CEOs, doctors, judges, all products of John Anderson's quiet influence, all confronting the cost of their own success. Margaret Chen's leaked email to Warren Enterprises board became a viral sensation. "While we counted profits, he counted lives changed. While we built towers, he built futures. Who is truly richer?" The philosophical question resonated across social platforms, spawning countless debates about the meaning of wealth and achievement. Emma Thompson's latest article hit like a thunderbolt: "The Price of Progress: How America Forgot Its Teachers." The piece traced John Anderson's journey from respected headmaster to street sweeper, parallel with the nation's shifting priorities from education to corporation. The New York Times website crashed under the traffic. Local news crews interviewed the children John still tutored, capturing heartbreaking testimony about his continuing dedication despite illness. "He never let us give up," a young girl explained, holding up a paper marked with his distinctive encouraging comments. He said, "Every problem has a solution if you care enough to find it." The story transcended national boundaries, with international media drawing painful comparisons. European outlets pointed to their social systems, while Asian commentators noted the Confucian tragedy of a teacher reduced to sweeping streets. The global response forced uncomfortable questions about American values. But protesters now carried signs comparing Lucas Warren's net worth to a teacher's salary, John's hospital bills to corporate tax breaks, Tommy's medication costs to executive bonuses. Each comparison sparked fresh outrage, fresh debates, fresh demands for systemic change. In the midst of this media storm, Tommy's quiet dedication to his homework became a powerful symbol. News cameras captured him working through math problems, embodying his grandfather's beliefs about education and perseverance. The image of the boy studying while his world crumbled resonated deeply with viewers worldwide. As John Anderson fought for his life in room 437, his story was fighting another battle in the court of public opinion. Every revealed detail, every shared memory, every corporate disclosure added to a growing narrative about values lost and wisdom forgotten. The media frenzy had transcended mere news; it had become a national reckoning. The world watched, commented, and debated as a simple street sweeper's dignity forced them to confront uncomfortable truths about success, responsibility, and the true meaning of wealth. In newsrooms and boardrooms, in homes and hospitals, John Anderson's last lesson was being heard loud and clear. As John Anderson's story touches our hearts, join our community of compassionate souls who believe in the power of human dignity. By subscribing to our channel, you're not just following a story, you're becoming part of a movement that celebrates unsung heroes and the quiet warriors among us. The boardroom of Warren Enterprises fell silent as the final vote was tallied. Lucas Warren, absent from the most crucial meeting in his company's history, was officially removed as CEO by a margin of 8-1. Margaret Chen, the lone dissenting vote, quietly closed her leather portfolio and walked out, her resignation letter already drafted. The news hit Wall Street like a thunderbolt. Warren Enterprises stock, once a symbol of corporate success, plunged to historic lows. Trading was halted twice as panic selling gripped the market. The merger with Pierce Industries lay in ruins, and vulture investors circled both companies with predatory intent. Warren Enterprises collapses, the price of conscience, screamed the Wall Street Journal's headline. The company Lucas had built over 25 years began unraveling at breathtaking speed. Major clients cancelled contracts, partners distanced themselves, and the SEC investigation expanded to include years of questionable practices. The human cost mounted by the hour. Middle managers cleared their desks, retirement accounts evaporated, and security escorted shell-shocked employees from the gleaming tower that had once symbolized corporate achievement. The very people Lucas had meant to protect were now casualties of his moral awakening. In a cruel irony, the pediatric wing of Presbyterian Hospital, the one whose funding had been diverted for the merger, faced closure due to the company's collapse. Dr. Mitchell fought back tears as she informed her staff of impending layoffs. The system John Anderson had tried to change was claiming more victims. Robert Pierce faced his own professional apocalypse. Without the merger's protective umbrella, Pierce Industries fell prey to a hostile takeover by an overseas conglomerate. The company's proud tradition of ethical business practices and employee care, built on John Anderson's principles, would soon be dismantled for profit. Lucas's personal fortune, once measured in billions, hemorrhaged with every market tick. His properties were seized, his accounts frozen, and his assets scrutinized. The empire he'd sacrificed everything to build crumbled like a sand castle at high tide. Yet strangely, watching it fall from Tommy's hospital room, he felt an unfamiliar sense of peace. Margaret Chen walked through the emptying offices of Warren Enterprises one last time. Staff huddled in corners, discussing severance packages and job prospects. The corporate machine that had once seemed invincible was grinding to a halt. She paused at Lucas's former office, now sealed with legal notices, remembering countless victories that suddenly felt hollow. The financial press dissected every detail of the collapse with ruthless precision. Analysts who had once praised Lucas's business acumen now questioned his every decision. His absence from the crucial board meeting became a Harvard Business School case study in failed leadership. His choice to prioritize a former teacher over shareholder value was debated in MBA programs worldwide. The professional devastation spread beyond the corporate sphere. Law firms that had represented Warren Enterprises faced scrutiny. Accounting firms that had certified their books underwent investigation. The ripple effects touched thousands of lives, from janitors to executives, all because one billionaire remembered his teacher's lessons too late. In the end, Lucas Warren's business legacy was reduced to cautionary tales and bankruptcy filings. His name, once synonymous with corporate success, became linked with one of the most spectacular falls in Wall Street history. The press dubbed it the Anderson equation, the calculation of profit against principle, and the price of remembering forgotten values. Yet amid the professional wreckage, a different kind of legacy was taking shape. Former employees, instead of bitter accusations, spoke of awakening consciences. The collapse sparked discussions about corporate responsibility that reached far beyond Warren Enterprises. In boardrooms across the country, executives looked at their own choices with new eyes, wondering what their old teachers would think of who they'd become. The professional consequences were devastating, but they carried seeds of transformation. As Lucas watched his empire fall, John Anderson's voice echoed from decades past: success isn't measured by what you gain, but by what you give. In the ruins of his corporate achievement, those words finally made sense. John Anderson drew his final breath at 10:47 a.m., his weathered hand still resting on Tommy's math worksheet. The hospital room, despite its sterile environment, held the sacred silence of a classroom after the last bell, a teacher's work complete, though the lessons would echo on. The personal cost became immediately apparent. Tommy, now truly orphaned, faced an uncertain future. Child services arrived within hours, their presence a stark reminder that John's sacrifice had left his grandson vulnerable. The boy clutched his grandfather's street sweeper's uniform, refusing to let go of this last tangible connection. Lucas Warren, stripped of his corporate armor, found himself confronting the true weight of loss. His mentor's death coincided with the complete dismantling of his carefully constructed life. The penthouse was seized, his accounts frozen, his reputation in tatters. Yet watching Tommy solve equations through tears, these material losses seemed trivial. Dr. Mitchell discovered her own career in jeopardy. The hospital board, concerned about publicity, questioned her emotional involvement with the patient. Her advocacy for John's treatment had crossed professional boundaries, they claimed. The prestigious position she'd worked decades to achieve now balanced on a knife's edge. Robert Pierce faced personal bankruptcy as his company collapsed. His family's three-generation legacy, built on John Anderson's early guidance, crumbled in the wake of failed merger attempts. His wife left, taking their children to her parents' home, unable to understand why he'd chosen loyalty to a former teacher over financial security. The personal toll extended beyond the immediate circle. Margaret Chen's daughter had to leave Riverside Academy, the scholarship funds evaporating with Warren Enterprises' collapse. The proud single mother who had balanced corporate ambition with maternal devotion now faced her child's disappointment. Tommy's classmates rallied around him, but their parents, many employed by Warren Enterprises or Pierce Industries, struggled to explain why caring about others could cost so much. The children gathered daily in the hospital chapel, continuing their study groups as John had taught them, their young voices mixing with prayers. Emma Thompson's pursuit of truth cost her trusted sources and professional relationships. Fellow journalists accused her of crossing the line between reporting and advocacy. Her Pulitzer prospects dimmed as editors questioned her objectivity. Yet each time she saw Tommy working on homework in the hospital corridor, she knew the price was worth paying. The personal sacrifices rippled through the community. Families dependent on Warren Enterprises faced foreclosures. Pierce Industries employees cancelled college plans for their children. The very educational opportunities John Anderson had championed became casualties of the corporate collapse he had inadvertently triggered. In the quiet moments after John's death, Lucas sat with Tommy, attempting to explain compound interest as his former teacher had once done for him. His voice cracked, the equations blurred, and for the first time since childhood, the billionaire wept openly. The cost of remembering his values had been enormous, but the cost of forgetting them had been even greater. The street where John had swept was oddly empty now, his absence felt by the early morning workers who had come to rely on his quiet greeting and understanding smile. His small apartment, filled with students' thank-you notes and worn textbooks, stood as a testament to a life rich in purpose if poor in possessions. As night fell over the city, the personal losses cast long shadows. Careers, relationships, securities all sacrificed on the altar of remembered principles. Yet in Tommy's determined focus on his studies, in Lucas's stumbling attempts to teach, in the quiet solidarity of those who had chosen conscience over comfort, John Anderson's final lesson took root: some prices are worth paying. The city's response to John Anderson's death split along unexpected lines. Outside Presbyterian Hospital, thousands gathered for a candlelight vigil, their flames dancing against the gathering dusk. Wall Street traders stood shoulder to shoulder with street sweepers, corporate lawyers beside teaching assistants, all united in honoring a man who had chosen dignity over dollars. Social media erupted in contradictory waves. John Anderson's legacy trended alongside corporate betrayal. Some praised Lucas Warren's choice to honor his mentor over his minions, while others condemned him for sacrificing thousands of jobs on the altar of personal redemption. The debate raged across platforms, forcing uncomfortable conversations about values and responsibility. Local news captured the scene as John's former students gathered at Riverside Academy. The school's current headmaster opened the auditorium for an impromptu memorial, where successful professionals shared stories of the quiet interventions that had changed their lives. A judge recalled borrowed lunch money, a surgeon remembered extra tutoring sessions, a CEO spoke of secret scholarship funds. The neighborhood where John and Tommy had lived responded with quiet grace. Their landlord, a former Riverside student himself, declared their small apartment would become a free tutoring center. Local families left flowers outside the door, each bouquet accompanied by a story of John's impact on their children's education. Critics emerged from corporate circles, denouncing Lucas's choice as emotional and irresponsible. Business publications calculated the cost of his decision in cold numbers: jobs lost, pensions evaporated, families displaced. Yet even these analyses couldn't ignore the human element of the story, the mathematics of morality that John Anderson had taught decades ago. Religious leaders seized upon the narrative, drawing parallels to parables of sacrifice and redemption. Secular commentators pointed to systemic failures that forced such impossible choices. Politicians on both sides attempted to capture the moment, though their rhetoric fell flat against the simple dignity of John's final days. The city's street sweepers organized a silent procession, pushing their brooms down Manhattan's avenues in a quiet tribute to their fallen colleague. The sound of bristles on pavement echoed through canyons of glass and steel, a rhythmic reminder of dignity and humble service. Tommy's classmates launched a campaign to rename Riverside's mathematics wing after their teacher's grandfather. Their online petition gathered millions of signatures, even as their own families faced uncertainty in the wake of the corporate collapse. Their dedication to education, despite circumstances, embodied John's deepest beliefs. In coffee shops and boardrooms, on subways and street corners, conversations turned to fundamental questions: what defines success? What do we owe each other? How do we measure the value of a life? John Anderson's story became a mirror in which the community saw its own choices reflected. The medical staff at Presbyterian, led by Dr. Mitchell, established a fund for uninsured patients, naming it after the man who had taught them that care transcends cost. Even as their own jobs hung in balance, they committed to continuing his legacy of putting people before profits. As night fell over the city, the competing narratives merged into something larger than controversy. John Anderson's passing had forced a community to confront its contradictions, to question its priorities, to remember values too often forgotten in the rush towards success. In the end, the most powerful response came from the students still gathering in Tommy's apartment, determined to continue their studies despite uncertainty. They represented John Anderson's true legacy, not the buildings that bore donors' names, but the unquenchable desire to learn, to grow, to become more than circumstances might allow. The truth emerged 3 days after John Anderson's death, as Emma Thompson pieced together decades of bank records and personal correspondence. The story she uncovered transformed the narrative from one of personal sacrifice to something far more profound and systemic. Dr. Sarah Mitchell was the first connection to surface. While reviewing John's medical history, she discovered a startling detail: her own medical school scholarship, attributed to an anonymous donor, had come from a special account John had established by selling his family's lake house. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. She had been treating her own benefactor without knowing it. The web of connections deepened when Robert Pierce found a faded letter in his company's founding documents. The initial seed money for Pierce Industries hadn't come from a venture capital firm as everyone believed, but from John Anderson's retirement fund. The former headmaster had quietly cashed out his pension to help his former students start a business that would prioritize people over profits. Lucas Warren's own investigation revealed the most stunning connection. The emergency fund that had saved his education at Riverside hadn't been a school resource at all. It was John Anderson's inheritance from his late wife. Every dollar that had launched Lucas toward his billions had come from his teacher's personal sacrifice. More connections surfaced hourly. the hospital's pediatric wing, which Warren Enterprises had stopped funding, bore a hidden link to John Anderson. He had been anonymously funding 3 beds in the children's ward through a complex arrangement of part-time jobs, including his street sweeping position. The very institution that had failed to save him had been secretly supported by his meager earnings. Margaret Chen discovered that her daughter's mysterious scholarship to Riverside Academy had come from a fund established by John Anderson's night job as a security guard. He had worked double shifts, watching over the same buildings where his former students now held executive positions, using his earnings to continue supporting education. The pattern stretched back decades. John had created an intricate network of support systems, using his various jobs and minimal savings to quietly sustain the dreams of others. The street sweeping route he'd chosen passed by schools and shelters where he could identify students needing help. Even his early morning schedule had been deliberately selected to allow him to tutor struggling students in the afternoons. Tommy's own story held another layer of revelation. His expensive asthma medications hadn't been covered by generic insurance, as everyone thought John had been participating in medical trials as a control subject to earn extra money for his grandson's treatment. The cancer that ultimately claimed his life had been accelerated by these trials, a fact he had hidden from everyone. Emma's investigation unveiled a complex web of small donations, carefully planned work schedules, and strategic sacrifices that showed John Anderson hadn't simply fallen from success to poverty, he had chosen a path of secret service. Every job, every location, every hour of his day had been meticulously organized to maximize his ability to help others. The final piece fell into place when Lucas discovered a series of letters in John's apartment. His mentor had been offered prestigious positions at private schools, consulting roles at major corporations, and even a position on Warren Enterprises' board of directors. He had declined them all, choosing instead to maintain his network of support for struggling students and families. These revelations transformed the narrative. John Anderson hadn't been a victim of circumstance or corporate greed. He had been the architect of his own destiny, choosing a life of meaningful impact over personal comfort. His street sweeping job, viewed with pity by many, had been carefully chosen for its early hours and route past schools where he could spot students in need. The hidden connections painted a picture not of defeat but of deliberate sacrifice, not of failure but of calculated service. John Anderson had created a shadow network of support and opportunity, using his limited resources with strategic precision to maximize their impact on others' lives. As Emma Thompson's article detailing these connections went viral, it forced a fundamental re-evaluation of success and dignity. The man they had pitied had actually been the maestro of a subtle symphony of service, conducting a quiet revolution in lives touched and futures shaped. The revelation of these hidden connections transformed John Anderson's legacy from a cautionary tale about societal failure into a masterclass in purposeful living. His final lesson proved to be his most powerful, showing that true wealth lies not in what you accumulate, but in how strategically you give it away. The revelation of John Anderson's intricate network of sacrifice and service sent shockwaves through public consciousness. The narrative shifted dramatically as Emma Thompson's expose went viral, the master plan of a street sweeper, how one man orchestrated a revolution of kindness. What had begun as outrage over corporate greed transformed into awe at the strategic brilliance of a man who had engineered his own descent from privilege to maximize his impact. Social media exploded with a new hashtag, The Anderson Strategy, as people shared stories of discovering their own connections to his hidden web of support. Wall Street analysts, who had condemned Lucas Warren's choice as emotional recklessness, now found themselves studying John Anderson's method of resource allocation. His careful balancing of multiple jobs, strategic selection of work locations, and precise timing of assistance represented a masterclass in social impact investing that business schools scrambled to analyze. The public's understanding of dignity underwent a seismic shift. Images of John in his street sweeper's uniform, once seen as symbols of society's failure, were recast as portraits of deliberate sacrifice. People began noticing their own city street sweepers differently, recognizing that service wasn't a fall from grace, but could be a chosen path to impact. Corporate leaders faced growing pressure to explain their own definitions of success. The contrast between John Anderson's strategic philanthropy and traditional corporate giving programs sparked intense debate. Companies rushed to establish Anderson Initiative programs, seeking to replicate his model of direct, strategic intervention in community needs. Media coverage shifted dramatically. From headmaster to street sweeper, a masterclass in strategic social impact replaced earlier headlines about corporate tragedy. News anchors who had pitied John's decline now praised his brilliant long-term planning and sacrifice. Financial programs analyzed his resource allocation with the same respect once reserved for corporate mergers. The revelation about his participation in medical trials to fund Tommy's treatment transformed him from victim to strategist in the public eye. Medical ethics boards began examining how clinical trial compensation could be better structured to prevent such desperate choices, while admiring the strategic thinking behind his decision. Lucas Warren's reputation underwent its own transformation. What had seemed like impulsive corporate suicide was reframed as a student finally understanding his teacher's ultimate lesson. Investors who had fled Warren Enterprises began returning, drawn to the promise of a company recommitting to its founder's original values. Dr. Mitchell's hospital became a case study in hidden impact as the full scope of John's influence emerged. His strategic selection of the street sweeping route that passed the hospital had allowed him to identify patients in need, connecting them with resources through his network of former students. Medical administrators nationwide began studying his methods of informal community healthcare support. The education sector experienced particular upheaval as John's techniques came to light. His method of identifying struggling students during his pre-dawn route, arranging tutorial support through his network, and maximizing the impact of minimal resources became a blueprint for educational outreach programs. Robert Pierce's public standing shifted from failed CEO to keeper of John Anderson's legacy. His company's ethical business practices were re-examined as deliberate implementations of his mentor's philosophy. Investors began returning to Pierce Industries, drawn by the promise of conscious capitalism guided by Anderson's principles. Even the SEC investigation changed course, moving from examining corporate malfeasance to studying how John's model of strategic social impact could be integrated into regulatory frameworks. His ability to create significant social change with minimal resources challenged fundamental assumptions about philanthropic effectiveness. The story of Tommy's education took on new significance as people realized it wasn't just about a grandfather's sacrifice, but a carefully orchestrated plan to demonstrate the power of educational investment. Schools nationwide began examining their own support systems, looking for ways to implement Anderson-style strategic intervention programs. Margaret Chen's revelation about the true source of her daughter's scholarship sparked a movement among corporate executives to create similar anonymous support networks. The idea that true impact often required sacrificing recognition resonated deeply with a generation tired of performative philanthropy. Public opinion had completed its transformation. John Anderson was no longer seen as a victim of circumstance, but as a master strategist who had chosen his path deliberately. His life became a blueprint for meaningful impact, studied by philanthropists, business leaders, and social workers alike. The shift in perception brought with it a deeper understanding of dignity and purpose. People began questioning their own definitions of success, examining whether their achievements matched John Anderson's standard of strategic impact. His final lesson, that true leadership often requires choosing influence over affluence, became a touchstone for a society re-examining its values. The public no longer saw a tragedy in John Anderson's story, but a triumph of strategic compassion. His legacy was not just in the lives he'd touched, but in demonstrating how careful planning and willing sacrifice could multiply impact far beyond apparent resources. The full scope of John Anderson's impact emerged like a complex tapestry in the weeks following his death. Each thread revealed connected to hundreds of others, weaving a pattern of influence that stretched far beyond the streets he'd swept or the classroom he'd left behind. Within the confines of his modest apartment, investigators discovered a meticulously maintained ledger spanning 30 years. Every penny earned from his multiple jobs had been carefully allocated Sarah Mitchell Medical School application fees, Robert Pierce business license, Lucas Warren winter coat and lunch program. The entries, written in his precise handwriting, documented thousands of small interventions that had altered the trajectories of countless lives. Behind his bed, a wall of photographs told silent stories of success. Children in graduation gowns, medical students receiving white coats, small business owners cutting ribbons, each image annotated with careful notes about their dreams and the specific support they needed. Some of the city's most successful individuals featured in these hidden chronicles of compassion. His street-sweeping route, mapped out in detailed notes, revealed strategic genius. Each turn had been calculated to pass by schools during crucial morning hours when struggling students might arrive early, seeking quiet places to study. His schedule aligned perfectly with hospital shift changes, allowing him to identify healthcare workers facing financial struggles. The local library unveiled a surprising discovery. John had established an unofficial homework club that met in the reference section each afternoon. The librarians shared stories of how he would appear during his breaks, still in his street sweeper's uniform, to help students with mathematics and science. Many of these students had gone on to earn scholarships to prestigious universities. A cache of letters found in his closet revealed correspondence with successful former students, each containing small amounts of money with notes like "pass it forward when you can or for someone else who needs it." He had created a perpetual cycle of giving, teaching recipients that success carried a responsibility to others. Tommy's own story gained deeper meaning as investigators found his grandfather's detailed educational plans. John had mapped out his grandson's academic journey through college, with contingency plans for every possible obstacle. Even his choice of street sweeping shifts had been designed to maximize time for Tommy's tutoring. The hospital's records revealed John's participation in multiple medical trials, each carefully selected to coincide with times he could monitor students arriving at nearby schools. He had transformed even his medical appointments into opportunities for mentorship, using hospital waiting rooms as impromptu counseling offices for families facing similar challenges. Former students, now scattered across the globe, began sharing stories of John's invisible influence. A surgeon in Boston revealed how John had arranged for her to shadow a doctor during his own medical appointments. A judge described how John's street sweeping route had deliberately passed by the courthouse, allowing quick meetings on the steps to discuss law school applications. His involvement in the community went deeper than anyone had realized. The local coffee shop owner shared how John had helped her secure a small business loan by connecting her with former students in banking. The homeless shelter director spoke of how he would identify families in need during his pre-dawn shifts and quietly connect them with resources. The most powerful legacy emerged in the discovery of his blueprint for impact, a detailed manuscript hidden in his apartment. In it, John had outlined his philosophy of strategic giving, explaining how limited resources could be maximized through careful planning and networking. The document revealed that his descent from headmaster to street sweeper had been a calculated choice to position himself where he could identify and help those most in need. His legacy transcended individual success stories. John Anderson had created a methodology for meaningful impact, demonstrating how strategic positioning and careful resource allocation could multiply the effect of even modest means. His blueprint became a manual for conscious social impact, studied by philanthropists and community organizers worldwide. The investigation uncovered a network of informal mentorship that spanned generations. Former students had become mentors themselves, creating a cascade of positive influence that touched thousands of lives. John had engineered a self-perpetuating system of support that continued growing even after his death. Perhaps most remarkably, his legacy included a vision for the future. Among his papers was a detailed plan for transforming his experience into a formal program for identifying and supporting struggling students. He had mapped out how his methods could be replicated in other communities, creating a blueprint for systematic change. John Anderson's true legacy wasn't just in the lives he'd touched directly, but in demonstrating how strategic compassion could transform a single person's limited resources into a powerful force for change. His life became a masterclass in the art of meaningful impact, teaching that true success lies not in personal achievement, but in the careful orchestration of opportunity for others. In the days following John Anderson's funeral, change rippled through New York City with the quiet persistence he had always championed. Lucas Warren, no longer a billionaire but somehow richer in purpose, converted his penthouse into a temporary home for Tommy and 3 other students who had lost their housing in the corporate collapse. The first major announcement came on a rain-soaked Monday morning. The Warren Anderson Foundation was established, not with corporate millions, but with the last of Lucas's personal savings and the proceeds from selling his art collection. Its mission statement, written in John's precise style, focused on identifying and supporting invisible potential in overlooked communities. Dr. Sarah Mitchell transformed the hospital's approach to community care, implementing what she called the Anderson Protocol. Medical staff began paying attention not just to patients' physical symptoms, but to subtle signs of educational or financial needs. The hospital's waiting areas were converted into study spaces, complete with tutoring volunteers and educational resources. Robert Pierce, though no longer controlling his family's company, launched a smaller but more focused venture, Anderson Educational Consulting. The firm specialized in helping schools develop programs for identifying and supporting struggling students, using John's recently discovered blueprint as its fundamental guide. Their first client was Riverside Academy. Tommy, surrounded by his grandfather's former students, flourished despite his loss. His small bedroom in Lucas's converted penthouse became a hub for study groups, continuing John's tradition of peer support and educational excellence. The boy's resilience and dedication to learning became a living testament to his grandfather's principles. The street-sweeping route John had so carefully designed became a model for community engagement. City planners studied his patterns, amazed at how he had created informal support networks through simple presence and timing. Other cities began implementing similar strategies, training municipal workers to serve as community observers and connectors. Margaret Chen, drawing on her years of corporate experience, established a mentorship program matching successful professionals with students from challenging backgrounds. The program's innovation lay in its subtlety. Following John's example, help was offered quietly and strategically, preserving dignity while providing crucial support. Emma Thompson's continued investigation revealed more of John's methods, leading to the publication of the Anderson Approach: Strategic Compassion in Community Building. The book became required reading in social work and education programs, transforming how institutions thought about community support and resource allocation. The most profound, immediate change occurred at Presbyterian Hospital's pediatric wing. Anonymous donations, many from John's former students, created a sustainable fund for families facing choices between medication and education. And every contribution came with the same note: pass it forward when you can, echoing John's lifelong philosophy. Lucas, though stripped of his corporate titles, found himself busier than ever. He spent mornings teaching mathematics at Riverside Academy, afternoons overseeing the foundation's development, and evenings helping Tommy with homework. His former business acumen, once used for acquisitions, now focused on maximizing social impact with minimal resources. The apartment building where John and Tommy had lived became an unofficial community center. The tutoring program he had started in his small living room expanded to occupy the entire first floor, donated by the landlord, another life touched by John's quiet influence years before. Local businesses, inspired by the revelations about John's strategic networking, began their own initiatives. Coffee shops offered quiet study spaces during off-peak hours. Restaurants implemented discrete meal programs for struggling students. Bookstores created homework help corners. The community's resources, though not increased, were being reallocated more effectively. The Street Sweepers Union established the Anderson Excellence Award, recognizing members who went beyond their official duties to support their communities. The first recipient was a woman who, inspired by John's example, had been using her early morning route to identify elderly residents needing assistance. Even the corporate world felt the immediate impact. Companies began evaluating their community involvement not by dollars donated, but by lives touched and potential unlocked. The Anderson metrics became a new standard for measuring corporate social responsibility, focusing on strategic impact rather than monetary value. Through it all, Tommy maintained his grandfather's precise schedule: early morning studies, focused school days, and evening tutoring sessions with younger students. He had inherited not just John's dedication to education, but his understanding that true learning always carried an obligation to teach others. These immediate changes, though significant, were just the beginning. John Anderson's strategic approach to community impact had planted seeds that would continue growing, transforming how society thought about success, service, and the power of strategic compassion. 1 year after John Anderson's passing, Riverside Academy hosted a dedication ceremony for its new Community Engagement Center. The building, its architecture reflecting John's philosophy of accessibility, featured floor-to-ceiling windows that allowed passers-by to see the studying students within a transparent beacon of educational opportunity. Lucas Warren stood at the podium, no longer wearing designer suits but carrying himself with a different kind of dignity. "My mentor taught us that true education isn't confined to classrooms," he addressed the gathered crowd. "It happens in street corners, waiting rooms, and pre-dawn hours. It happens wherever someone chooses to teach and another chooses to learn." The Warren Anderson Foundation had exceeded all expectations, not through financial power, but through strategic implementation of John's methods. Their street-level scholarship program had identified and supported over 300 promising students in its first year, using a network of community observers modeled after John's early morning routes. Tommy, now 13, had emerged as a natural leader among his peers. His grandfather's dedication to education lived on in the study groups he organized, the younger students he tutored, and his unwavering belief that everyone deserved a chance to learn. His own academic excellence had earned him a spot in Riverside's advanced program, where he often found himself teaching concepts to classmates. Dr. Mitchell's implementation of the Anderson Protocol had transformed Presbyterian Hospital's approach to community health. The waiting areas, once sterile and intimidating, now buzzed with quiet activity students completing homework, adult education classes, and informal mentoring sessions. Healthcare had become holistic, addressing not just physical symptoms but educational and social needs. Robert Pierce's educational consulting firm had expanded nationwide, helping schools implement John's methods of identifying and supporting struggling students. The Anderson model of community engagement had been adopted by school districts across the country, proving that strategic compassion could work on a large scale without requiring massive resources. The street sweeping route that John had so carefully designed became a case study in urban planning. Cities worldwide had begun training their municipal workers in the Anderson approach to community observation and support. Street sweepers, bus drivers, and maintenance workers were now seen as crucial links in the social support network. Margaret Chen's mentorship program had paired over 1,000 professionals with students in need, each relationship carefully structured to preserve dignity while providing support. The program's success rate in college admissions and job placements proved that John's methods could be replicated and scaled effectively. Emma Thompson's book had sparked a revolution in social work education. Universities now offered courses in strategic community impact, studying John's techniques for maximizing limited resources through careful planning and networking. His blueprint had become a manual for effective social change. The apartment building where John had lived was now officially the Anderson Community Learning Center, offering free tutoring, adult education classes, and quiet study spaces. The wall of photographs he had maintained now extended through the entire first floor, documenting an ever-growing network of success stories. Local businesses had fully embraced the Anderson model of community support. Coffee shops hosted study groups, restaurants provided discrete meal programs, and bookstores offered homework help corners. The community's resources, though not increased, were being used more effectively through strategic coordination. Presbyterian Hospital's pediatric wing, saved by a network of small donations, had become a model for community-centered healthcare. The waiting room where John had spent so many hours now featured a plaque "Education happens everywhere," a reminder of his belief in turning every moment into a learning opportunity. The city's street sweepers had become proud participants in the Anderson Initiative, using their early morning routes to identify community needs and connect people with resources. Their uniforms now carried a small emblem, a broom crossed with a book, symbolizing the union of service and education. Lucas's converted penthouse had evolved into an informal dormitory for students facing housing insecurity. The space that had once showcased wealth now demonstrated a different kind of richness, young people supporting each other's dreams, following John's example of turning personal space into educational opportunity. Perhaps most significantly, the definition of success in the community had shifted. Achievement was no longer measured solely by personal gain, but by impact on others. John's legacy had transformed how people viewed wealth, education, and community responsibility. As the dedication ceremony concluded, Tommy led a group of younger students through a mathematics lesson, his grandfather's teaching methods evident in his patient explanations and strategic encouragement. The scene perfectly captured John Anderson's lasting impact, not just in the lives he had touched directly, but in the ripple effect of strategic compassion that continued to spread. 1 year after his passing, John Anderson's influence had grown stronger, proving that true legacy isn't measured in buildings named or fortunes left, but in lives transformed and lessons passed forward. His strategic approach to community impact had become a blueprint for sustainable social change, demonstrating that one person's careful planning could create waves of positive transformation. A decade after John Anderson's passing, his influence had evolved from a local phenomenon into a global movement. The Anderson model of strategic compassion had been adopted by communities worldwide, proving that careful planning and dignified support could transform lives more effectively than traditional philanthropy. Tommy Anderson, now a 21-year-old graduate student at Columbia University's School of Education, had become the living embodiment of his grandfather's legacy. His research focused on scaling the Anderson method, using data analytics to identify opportunities for strategic intervention in underserved communities. His thesis, The Mathematics of Compassion Calculating Maximum Impact with Minimum Resources, had already attracted attention from international development organizations. Lucas Warren had found his true calling as a teacher at Riverside Academy, his corporate expertise now focused on teaching business ethics through the lens of social responsibility. His students learned not just about profit margins, but about the strategic allocation of resources for community impact. The former billionaire had never been happier, measuring his wealth now in lives touched rather than dollars earned. The Warren Anderson Foundation had developed into a unique entity that didn't just distribute funds but taught communities how to maximize existing resources. Their manual, The Anderson Approach: A Strategic Guide to Community Transformation, had been translated into 27 languages and implemented in countries across 6 continents. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had revolutionized community healthcare through her expansion of the Anderson Protocol. Hospitals worldwide now incorporated educational support and community connection into their standard care practices. The waiting room study groups John had inspired had become a standard feature in medical facilities globally, transforming spaces of anxiety into opportunities for growth. Robert Pierce's educational consulting firm had evolved into the International Institute for Strategic Education, training teachers and community workers in John's methods. Their graduates worked in refugee camps, inner-city schools, and rural communities, proving that the Anderson approach could adapt to any context where resources were limited but human potential was abundant. The street sweeper's route that John had so carefully designed had become a Harvard Business School case study in strategic community engagement. Cities worldwide now mapped their municipal services with similar intentionality, turning everyday civil servants into crucial nodes in their community support networks. The humble street sweeper's uniform had become a symbol of dignified service and strategic impact. Presbyterian Hospital's pediatric wing, now the Anderson Center for Integrated Community Care, had become a model for healthcare institutions globally. Their approach to combining medical care with educational support and community resources had been replicated in medical facilities across the world, creating a new standard for holistic healthcare delivery. Margaret Chen's mentorship program had expanded into a global network, connecting professionals with students across borders and cultures. The program's success had challenged traditional notions of mentorship, showing how carefully structured support could bridge social and economic divides while preserving dignity on both sides. The Anderson Community Learning Center, originally just one converted apartment building, had spawned similar centers in cities worldwide. These spaces operated on John's principle that education happens everywhere, turning underutilized urban spaces into hubs of learning and community support. Emma Thompson's documentation of the Anderson method had evolved into a comprehensive academic field. Universities offered degrees in strategic community impact, studying how careful planning and dignified intervention could create sustainable social change without massive financial investment. The corporate world had been transformed by John's legacy as well. Companies now measured their success using the Anderson metrics, evaluating their impact not just in profits but in community transformation. Business schools taught the Anderson case alongside traditional management theories, preparing a new generation of leaders to think strategically about social impact. Most profoundly, the definition of success had shifted globally. The Anderson model had demonstrated that strategic compassion, carefully planned and dignified in delivery, could create more sustainable change than traditional charitable approaches. Communities worldwide had learned that true wealth lay not in resources possessed but in resources strategically shared. As Tommy stood at an international conference, presenting his research on scaling the Anderson method, he embodied his grandfather's legacy. The street sweeper's grandson had become a global authority on strategic social impact, proving that education and opportunity, properly structured, could transform not just individuals but entire societies. The future that John Anderson had quietly planned for during his pre-dawn roots had become reality on a scale he could never have imagined. His strategic approach to compassion had created a blueprint for sustainable social change that transcended cultural and economic boundaries. The humble street sweeper's carefully planned routine had evolved into a global movement, proving that true vision, combined with strategic planning and unwavering dignity, could transform the world. A decade after his passing, John Anderson's legacy continued to grow, not just in the lives he had touched directly, but in the millions who now benefited from his strategic approach to creating change. His final lesson that careful planning could multiply the impact of limited resources had become a guiding principle for social transformation worldwide. John Anderson's story reminds us that true impact often starts with a single compassionate action. If this tale of dignity and purpose has touched your heart, join our community by subscribing to our channel. Share this video with loved ones who might need a reminder that one person can make a difference. Hit the like button to help spread this message of hope, and leave a comment sharing how this story resonates with you. Together, we can create a ripple effect of kindness, just as John did through his quiet acts of service.